So hello boys and girls for our last reading of Hegel's lectures on the history of philosophy. And if you really made it uh, through all these lectures before, up to this one, congratulations. Technically I'm just doing that for myself, speaking into the void of history, for maybe comprehending it better and maybe indeed finding one or two people who like to join me on that journey. So if you really made it up to here, let me know in the comments. It would be very nice to get to know you. Okay, but let's not waste too much time. We really want to come to an end with Hegel's lectures on the history of philosophy. And it is indeed quite interesting that we made it up to here. So what is history? Well, or what is the history of philosophy? He gave us some criteria. We should not apply our own criteria. We should see every historical thought within its time, reconstructed within its time, not see it as a study of false ideas where we just laugh about people, how they could have been so stupid that they thought everything is water. We have to see how smart they have been in their time and how they contributed to the overall development that led to the moment of our history of philosophy. So, therefore Hegel says, every philosophy is the philosophy of its own day, a link in the whole chain of spiritual development, and thus it can only find satisfaction for the interests belonging to its particular time. And this is where we are. We already have said that the history of philosophy, however, is a history of the living moment. So we make it come alive, not just by educating ourselves about what has happened in the past, but by understanding how the past is part of us. As Foucault would, for example, say, a history of the present. On this account, an earlier philosophy does not give satisfaction to the mind in which a deeper conception reigns. And this now is your mind. What mind seeks for in philosophy is this conception, which already constitutes its inward determination and the root of its existence, conceived of as object to thought. So what our mind, as participating in the universal mind, indeed looks for is a particular conception. Now, what is this conception? It's a conception that is adequate to our inward determination of thinking, to the way we think in ourselves. And so to see that the processes of the historical development of philosophies that have happened before can as well be determinations of how we think. And this is quite well observable when we look how children develop their moral feelings and so on and so forth. It follows certain stages. And I think in that sense, Hegel wants to say we should reconstruct history. Mind demands a knowledge of itself. This is an interesting sentence. I have to mark that. That's what mind is, an activity of getting to know itself. But in the earlier philosophy, the idea is not yet present in this determinate character. Hence the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, and indeed all philosophies ever live and are present in their principles. But philosophy no longer has the particular form and aspect possessed by that of Plato and Aristotle. We cannot rest content with them, and they cannot be revived. Hence, there can be no Platonists, Aristotelians, Stoics, or Epicureans today. So this is an interesting thought because I grasp myself usually as a kind of Hegelian, and somebody, like, he put the pistol on my chest last Saturday and he said, "So you are a Hegelian?" And I said, well, saying that you're a Hegelian means that at the same time you're not a Hegelian. So we're quasi-Hegelians. We are beyond the historical moment in time where we can fully be Hegelians, especially after what has happened in the aftermath of World War II. So if we say we are Hegelians, we are tearing us down, but this is maybe the particular point about Hegel. At the same time, there is no escape that we are all Hegelians. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we participate in the universal ideas that he has brought to the fore. So, okay, we are no Platonists. To reawaken them would be to try to bring back to an earlier stage the mind of a deeper culture and self-penetration. But this cannot be the case. It would be an impossibility, and as great a folly as were a man to wish to expend his energies in attaining the standpoint of the youth in endeavoring to be the boy or child again, whereas the man, the youth and the child are all one and the same individual. So, yeah, we cannot go back to be children again. We just can't, by virtue of the experiences we have made. We are the children, even though we have overcome them. I don't know if you ever have the feeling, but when I see myself as a 3-year-old in a picture, I always just tell myself, wow, is this me? And it is me. And in a sense, it's not. And I cannot go back to that former self. Once you're Hegelian, can never go back to. Okay, let's go on. The period of revival in the sciences, the new epoch in learning, which took place in the 15th and 16th centuries, began not only with a revived study of, but also with a reanimation of the old philosophies. Marsilius Ficinius was a Platonist. I may slaughter these Italian names. Marsilius Ficinus, I don't know, was a Platonist. An academy of Platonic philosophy was established, an academy of Platonic philosophy was established and installed with professors by Cosmos de Medici, and Ficinus was placed at the head of it. There were pure Aristotelians like Pomponius. Gassendi later on maintained the Epicurean philosophy, for his philosophy dealt with physics after the manner of the Epicureans. Lipsius wished to be a Stoic, and so on. So we have in history all the people who tried to be older philosophies. The sense of opposition was so great, ancient philosophy and Christianity, from or in which no special philosophy had developed, were so diverse that no philosophy peculiar to itself could develop in Christianity. What was or could be had as philosophy, either in conformity with or in opposition to Christianity, was a certain ancient philosophy which was thus taken up anew. But mummies, when brought amongst living beings, cannot there remain. So he somehow says that because they try to attach to these ancient philosophies, they could not really brought up a new Christian philosophy, as I understand him. So, and instead they are worshipping mummies of the past. Mind had for long possessed a more substantial life, a more profound notion of itself, and hence its thought had higher needs than such as could be satisfied by these philosophies. A revival such as this is then to be regarded only as a transitory period in which we learn to know the forms which are implied and which have gone before, and as the renewal of former struggles through the steps necessary in development. Such reconstructions and repetitions in a distant time of principles which have become foreign to mind are in history transitory only and formed in a language which is dead. Such things are translations only, and not originals, and mind does not find satisfaction accepting in knowledge of its own origination. So these philosophies are rather uninteresting because they are just antiquated forms of thinking, and so we are not going to follow these anymore. Actually, they were also missing the point of the philosophy that people of that time required that day. When modern times are in the same way called upon to revert to the standpoint of an ancient philosophy, as is recommended especially in regard to the philosophy of Plato, in order to make this a means of escaping from the complications and difficulties of succeeding times, this reversion does not come naturally as in the first case. This discrete counsel has the same origin as the request to cultivated members of society to turn back to the customs and ideas of the savages of the North American forests, or as the recommendation to adopt the religion of Melchizedek, which Fichte has maintained to be the purest and simplest possible, and therefore the one at which we must eventually arrive. On the one hand, in this retrogression, the desire for an origin and for a fixed point of departure is unmistakable, but such must be sought for in thought, an idea alone, and not in authoritatively given form. So he says here that if we just return to these old spirits because they were so awesome, this would not be an insight coming out of our thought, and therefore it would be authoritative. And authoritative or authority in this sense means that it makes us dependent. We wouldn't be independent and therefore free. But the central idea of modernity is to become free as a human being. On the other hand, the return of the developed, enriched mind to a simplicity such as this, which means to an abstract condition or thought, is to be regarded only as the escape of an incapacity which cannot enjoy the rich material of development which is seized before it, and which demands to be controlled and comprehended in its very depths by thought, but seeks a refuge in fleeing from the difficulty and in mere sterility. So yeah, if we just try to reinvigorate old philosophers without combining their thoughts within the mind and with the particular material that is given to us in our time, then it's just fleeing from our time, and it's a sterile lesson of how we look at the history of philosophy. I hope that's clear. From what has been said, it is quite comprehensible how so many of those who, whether induced by some special attraction such as this, or simply by the fame of Plato or ancient philosophy in general, direct their way thereto in order to draw their own philosophy from these sources, do not find themselves satisfied by the study, and unjustifiable quit such altogether. Satisfaction is found in them to a certain extent only. We must know in ancient philosophy or in the philosophy of any given period what we are going to look for. Or at least we must know that in such a philosophy there is before us a definite stage in the development of thought, and in it those forms and necessities of mind which lie within the limits of that stage alone are brought into existence. Yeah, and this is certainly interesting. So we have to relate the history of philosophy to our given period of time. And for example, Branham is often accused to adopt Hegel in a sense that is not adequate to Hegel. And in a sense, he is false in attributing something to him that he might not have said. But at the same time, he is correct in developing Hegel with regard to his own thoughts. There slumber in the mind of modern ideas more profound, which require for their awakening other surroundings and another present than the abstract dim grey thought of olden times. In Plato, for instance, questions regarding the nature of freedom, the origin of evil and of sin, providence, etc., do not find their philosophic answer. On such subjects, we certainly may in part take the ordinary serious views of the present time, and in part philosophically set their consideration altogether aside, or else consider sin and freedom as something negative only. But neither the one plan nor the other gives freedom to mind if such subjects have once been explicitly for it, and if the opposition in self-consciousness has given it the power of sinking its interest therein. The case is similar with regard to questions regarding the limits of knowledge, the opposition between subjectivity and objectivity which had not yet come up in Plato's age. The independence of the within itself and its explicit existence was foreign to him. So he explains here Plato's theory, how he gave us some ideas, but how he also didn't see some problems that we discuss nowadays. Man had not yet gone back within himself, had not yet set himself forth as explicit. The subject was indeed the individual is free, but as yet he knew himself only as a unity within his being. The Athenian knew himself to be free as such, just as the Roman citizens would, as ingenious. But the fact that man is in and for himself free in his essence and as man free-born was neither by Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, nor the Roman legislators, even though it is this conception alone which forms the source of law. So nowadays we have a way different conception of human beings, which makes our philosophy very different from these rather ancient philosophies. In Christianity, the individual personal mind for the first time becomes of real, infinite, and absolute value. God wills that all men shall be saved. It was in the Christian religion that the doctrine was advanced that all men are equal before God because Christ has set them free with the freedom of Christianity. These principles make freedom independent of any such things as birth, standing, or culture. The progress made through them is enormous, but they still come short of this, that to be free constitutes the very idea of man. So here he discusses the progress that came about with Christianity. Now keep in mind, this is not the end point of development, so Christianity could be seen as a historical development that of course can also be developed further, even though there are other parts in this project where he says, or in this text where he says Christianity is true once and for all. It's a little bit difficult to interpret Hegel fully on this subject matter because in a sense I would say philosophy was also restricted back in that time to religious doctrines. You understand what I mean. So the sense of this existent principle has been an active force for centuries and centuries, and an impelling power which has brought about the most tremendous revolutions. But the conception and the knowledge of the natural freedom of man is a knowledge of himself, which is not old. So yeah, and this is what the history of philosophy really is about. It's about the freedom of human beings. It's not so much to discover human beings in nature, namely how we construct nature. We can read it in that way, that we project our categories in nature in order to understand it at all. That does not mean that if we didn't do that, nature wouldn't exist. It just means that the way we access the mind-external world is subjectively distorted by our mind. Now, there are some interpretations of Hegel, of course, where we say, well, but we can know these objective categories. We can know the logical categories that make it possible to recognize the world, and in that sense, it's not a relativism. I don't belong to these people because I see even the logic on its path to discover the true essence of human beings, which is freedom. I see Hegel saying that the essence of human beings that we discover is radical freedom. And this radical freedom utters itself nowadays in transhumanism, where we really wonder, well, who do we want to become as human beings? Yeah, and this is my overall and conclusive thought on Hegel's theory that we should keep in mind. So I want to say again that Hegel is not a philosopher, according to my interpretation, of a stable reality, but he is a philosopher who explores how humans get to know themselves. And what do they get to know? Well, they get to know an infinite form of freedom, a freedom that is productive. And I often have people who say, well, but we are not free. And look, we are so determined by our surroundings. And I grant that. But see, let's say you are in a jail. There's still a sense of freedom you have, even you're completely restricted in that small cell. or even when we go so far as Sartre says, if we are completely constrained with our limbs and our hands and they're locked in a kind of chain or whatever, we cannot move at all, not even our head. Maybe we cannot even move our eyes. We would still have a sense of freedom. We could still decide who we want to be, in a sense. So this is the kind of freedom I believe Hegel talks about. And yeah, if you are interested in that, let me know in the comments. Do you have another interpretation of Hegel? Do you say, no, that does not work out? Don't be shy, discuss it with me. Other than that, I just would like to say, live long, read Hegel, and prosper.